Alternatives to replace Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, according to a new poll. Ipsos UK found that 42% of those who voted for the Tories in 2019 have a favourable view of Mr Sunak. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson scored slightly more, with 43%. However, his unfavourability was higher than the current Prime Minister. It comes amid claims of a plot to oust Rishi Sunak before the next election, after former Cabinet Minister Sir Simon Clarke called him to resign earlier this week. Millions of workers are taking home more pay today after a recent cut in the national insurance rate. Taxpayers now pay a rate of 10%, down from 12% from January. The government says the changes will save the average employee around £450 a year. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website at gbnews.com.
Welcome back. We're going to start with some breaking news because the King has been seen entering a private London clinic in the last few minutes ahead of his prostate surgery. Our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, is in the studio to bring us the latest. What do we know, Cameron?
So we know the King left Clarence House this morning, accompanied by Queen Camilla, and then he was seen arriving at the London clinic, the private hospital where the Princess of Wales is currently recovering from her abdominal surgery a couple of weeks ago, and he was seen entering the building with Queen Camilla as well. Now, what we don't know is whether Their Majesties are visiting Catherine, the Princess of Wales, or indeed the King is entering the hospital to receive treatment for the enlarged prostate. If you remember, we were told that he was due to have treatment on an enlarged prostate at some point this week. Buckingham Palace have not confirmed if that has happened yet. Of course, we can point to the fact that, of course, he's entering hospital the first time he has done so since that news was broke by Buckingham Palace. But the fact is they're not saying anything at this moment. But what we do know is the King has entered the London clinic this morning. One
question I just wondered is, would there not be a security risk by them both having treatment at the same hospital? It's like when they wouldn't both fly on the same plane.
Quite possibly. We know that the London clinic is heavily guarded. Police have been outside the doors ever since the Princess was admitted a couple of weeks ago. I think it's with any building, really. There are several members of the royal family in royal palaces at any one time, or indeed Westminster Abbey, for example. Of course, the London clinic it is well used to, as well as King Edward VII, treating high-profile patients, and that, of course, is perhaps what is happening here. Or the King and Queen could just be visiting the Princess, who is still recovering in that hospital.
And what is the standard practice of Buckingham Palace? Would they prefer that a surgery were to take place and then they release a statement afterwards just saying everything seems to be OK? Because that's what we saw with the Princess of Wales, didn't we, after her abdominal surgery?
Yeah, exactly. I suspect Buckingham Palace are staying very silent at the moment. I suspect they would tell us post-events what the King's condition is and what he has had done. Of course, we didn't hear about the Princess of Wales, as you said, until the surgery had happened. But what I would say is it's incredibly rare, as we spoke at length last week, for the King to give quite such detail as to the kind of medical procedure he's having done. So, for example, the fact he's told us that he's having a treatment for an enlarged prostate is incredibly rare. They usually keep medical details private. And he wanted to encourage others to seek treatment if they have... Oh, we have just received a statement from Buckingham Palace, so I'm just going to get it up on my phone. So a statement from Buckingham Palace. The King was this morning admitted to a London hospital for scheduled treatment. His Majesty would like to thank all those who have sent their good wishes over the past week and is delighted to learn that his diagnosis is having a positive impact on public health awareness. So there we are. Buckingham Palace has confirmed the King has been admitted to a London hospital for that treatment. They also say that he wishes to thank those for their good wishes over the past week and is delighted that his diagnosis of an enlarged prostate has had such a positive impact on public health awareness. Of course, we heard that the NHS website had exploded when it came to people looking
which shows how very different approach he's taking to his reign compared to his late mother. Do we know how long he's going to be having treatment for?
We don't know 100%. We expect it to be a couple of days at least. I think the guidance from Buckingham Palace when they first told us about the King's health diagnosis was that he's going to be out of action for a little bit of time. His public engagements in the interim have all been cancelled or at least postponed. It seems less serious than the Princess of Wales's hospital treatments, because she, of course, is expected to convalesce for at least 3 months. We're not expecting to see her until at least Easter on public engagements. The King, it's going to be a much shorter amount of time, but they haven't put an exact date on it because, of course, you never know how an operation is going to go.
No, of course. And what will this mean for the royal family? We now have confirmation that the Princess of Wales and King Charles are both in hospital.
Indeed. Well, it's easy for Prince William because he can visit his father and his wife at the same time. I think the London Clinic is a very prestigious, it's one of the best places you can get medical care, I think. Of course, it's a private hospital very close to King Edward VII, which is known for treating members of the royal family over the years. In terms of the royal family, it's only Queen Camilla, who is senior royals, who is carrying out a big public engagement at the moment. We have the Princess Royal and other less senior members of the royal family continuing and holding the force. But, of course, it does mean a lot of them are out of action at the moment. And Queen Camilla is with the King, because we saw her entering the hospital with His Majesty this morning. So, at the moment, no senior royals are carrying out any public engagements.
OK, Cameron, thank you so much for bringing that to us here on Britain's Newsroom. Of course, we'll have updates for you throughout the programme.
The Attorney-General is set to review the sentence of Valdo Calacane after the victims' families criticised the Crown Prosecution Service.
Yes, the 32-year-old fatally stabbed students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar before killing school caretaker Ian Coates last June.
His son, James Coates, said this after the sentencing.
The fails from the police, the CPS, the health service have resulted in the murder of my father and these 2 innocent students. The NHS Mental Health Trusts have to be held accountable for their failures along with the police. All we can do is hope that in due course some sort of justice will be served. This man has made a mockery of the system and he has got away with murder.
Those final words there, really quite powerful, wasn't it? He has got away with murder.
Yeah, there are lots of questions revolving around this about whether the victims were put first, the communication process between police and the families, and was it in fact the wrong charge that was pursued by the prosecution. So let's get more on this by speaking to our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Catherine, tell us what happens now that it has gone to the Attorney-General. What involvement does Victoria Prentice, the Attorney-General, now have? What does she have to decide?
Yes, so basically her and her legal team have got 28 days in which to decide whether or not they should escalate this. If they decide that they think that the sentence was indeed unduly lenient, which is certainly what the families feel, she can take the decision to refer this then to the Court of Appeal. What would then happen would be Court of Appeal judges would then look at it and pronounce accordingly. Now, we're some way off that, but of course there has been a huge reaction, very emotional scenes yesterday of the families of those 3 people so brutally killed in Nottingham in June last year. Spoke very notable too how James Coates, the son of Ian, the caretaker who was killed, used the word murder twice, said he has got away with murder. And that is at the heart of this, isn't it? Because he wasn't ultimately charged with murder. He was charged with manslaughter. He was found guilty of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility because he was a paranoid schizophrenic. Now, Emma Webber, the mother of Barnaby Webber, the 19-year-old who was killed along with his friend Grace O'Malley Kumar, also 19, said yesterday that they had been told the man would be charged with murder and that they understood that was what was happening. And it was only some 5 months later, very shortly before the pre-trial hearing, that they were informed that that had changed and he would instead be tried with manslaughter. Now they feel that she said they were rushed, hastened and railroaded. They are deeply unhappy with that decision. Now, former Justice Secretary Sir Robert Buckland has been speaking today and he said communication should lie at the heart of a service to bereaved families real criticism that the Crown Prosecution Service, not only of going for manslaughter rather than murder, but what the seeming lack of communication with these families. And also, of course, big questions now for the police and for the NHS as well.
Catherine, we've just seen some footage. I hope we can show it again now for viewers who are watching on television of Grace O'Malley Kumar and Barnaby Webber making their final steps just outside of their student accommodation just before they were attacked by Valdo Kalakani. This is in the early hours of the morning. It's about 4 o'clock in the morning on that June morning. Just the two of them on that deserted street just in the seconds before they were attacked. It's believed they're just a couple of hundred metres from their student accommodation. Perhaps one of the reasons why this has just captured the public consciousness quite so much. These two young people with their entire lives ahead of them. And as you were just saying there, Catherine, questions now for the police in all of this as well. And the Assistant Chief Constable of Nottinghamshire Police has even admitted, hasn't he, the shortcomings of the force and said that they should have done more to arrest Valdo Kalakani before he carried out this attack.
Yes, that's right. And Emma Webber, Barnaby's mother, said yesterday that he had, quote, blood on his hands, because we now know that this man, this killer, as he turned out to be, had assaulted a police officer some months before. There had been an arrest warrant out for him for months and months. There'd been various other violent incidents. He'd threatened people he lived with. He'd broken down doors. So very clearly some failures with the police, that this man was still on the streets, and also with the NHS and the mental health services, because he'd been sectioned 4 times. They knew he was a paranoid schizophrenic, a condition that can be managed in the community with antipsychotic medication. But we know that he wasn't taking it, and somehow or other this had fallen through the cracks. He was dangerous. He was allowed to be on the streets when clearly action should have been taken. And as a result, these two 19-year-olds, they just sat their first year exams at university, walking home after a night out. Their whole lives, as you say, should have been ahead of them. And caretaker Ian Coates, who should have had his whole retirement ahead of him, the only thing they did was have the misfortune to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. They and their families feel that they've been massively, massively let down.
And on that note, the families feeling they've been massively let down, the apparent failings that you've just gone through, Catherine, there are now calls for a public inquiry. How likely is it that that could happen now?
Well, let's see. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, was asked about this yesterday on a visit to North Yorkshire, and he referred to Kalakani as a very dangerous individual, said it was right that he'd probably spend the rest of his life in jail, but didn't at this point support calls for a public inquiry. So we will see what happens, but a lot of anger. People like Dame Priti Patel, former Home Secretary, also coming out. She's calling for a government review of how the Crown Prosecution Service takes decisions and keeps in touch and consults with families going forward.
Political correspondent Catherine Forster, thank you.
Now, the Alabama death row inmate Kenneth Eugene Smith has become the first person to be executed using nitrogen gas as he was put to death overnight.
Now, the state has called it the most painless and humane method of execution known to man.
Well, that's as the witness described the historic moment as horrific and the worst thing that he had ever seen.
US political analyst Eric Ham joins us. Good morning to you, Eric. I know there is a bit of a time difference here, but how, as they maybe wake up, how is the US, these various states reacting, the people of Alabama reacting to the execution overnight?
Well, we know that there has been some pushback and controversy considering that this method that was used in executing this prisoner is the first time this method has been used in more than 40 years. And we also know that other states are exploring this method as well. But the death penalty in the United States has always been controversial. In fact, we're now learning that at least of the 27 states that actually have the death penalty, there are at least 6 states that have actually implemented a moratorium on the death penalty. In fact, during the Trump administration, we know the federal government brought back the death penalty. So it's always been a polarizing impact here in the United States.
Yeah, and I'm sure that conversation is happening nationally today as they wake up. Why did the authorities in Alabama decide to use nitrogen gas in this case for the first time? And why is it such a controversial procedure?
Well, for a number of reasons. In fact, normally in the United States, most states have used lethal injection for these inmates when implementing the death penalty. But what we are learning is many pharmaceutical companies had begun over the years to not allow their drugs to be used for this type of execution, which made it very difficult for the states to actually have access to the drugs. In addition to that, we know in the case of this particular prisoner, this was actually the second time that the state had tried to actually implement this execution, the first time being through lethal injection. And it took them more than 3 hours to actually be able to implement the drugs. And so because it didn't work, now the state, along with others, are using this method because they believe that it's a more effective method in actually putting prisoners to death.
Is there a chance now that other states could follow using this method, Eric? And I think we should just explain. It's a mask, isn't it? Fixed to the face. It cannot slip. The gas begins to flow into the mask. Now, eyewitness reports say Kenneth Smith was convulsing. It took him some 22 minutes to die. And I also understand this is a procedure that isn't even permitted by vets. They wouldn't use it on animals. And yet there is still Alabama's doing it and other states could follow, maybe.
Yeah, that's right. We do know of at least 3 other states that are actually looking at using this method. However, many states continue to use lethal injection. But also in the United States, there are, and even throughout Europe, there are many use this method when they're attempting to euthanize people, and they believe that it's used humanely. In this case in particular, there was an actual mask that the lawyer for this inmate, as well as human rights activists, were saying made this process untested and were concerned about how it would be used. But that certainly did not deter Alabama from going forward with this execution.
OK, Eric Ham, US political analyst for us in Chicago. Thank you very much indeed.
You probably have some thoughts on that. Incredibly controversial. Is it humane? Is it torture? Let us know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.com.
Yeah, very divisive indeed. It's the last Friday of the month, so for millions of us, it means it's payday.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
And due to the national insurance, the national insurance cut, we should be taking more pay home. But in reality, is that the case?
Well, our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, joins us now. So will we be feeling the pounds in our pockets, do you think, Liam? We've got this cut, but things are very expensive at the moment, aren't they?
You will if you're a regular employee, but not if you're self-employed. Let me explain. So this is a tax cut, a cut in national insurance, which is tax in all but name. It's meant to be in a separate fund, but it isn't really. Let's be honest. This was announced by Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, in his autumn statement back in November. The Tories want to get a tax cut in early, not waiting for the March budget and then April. So there's a feel-good factor. Can you feel it in the economy? No, me neither. But the Tories are hoping that as inflation keeps falling, fingers crossed, toes crossed, as interest rates come down, as inflation means that real wages, take-home pay after inflation go up, then we'll all start feeling good and they can actually take the challenge to Labour and make a fist of contesting an upcoming general election in the autumn. So this tax cut came in by law in early January. As you rightly say, today is the first sort of big payday when it will apply. So let's have a look at some of the numbers, put my glasses on. So national insurance is paid by those earning over £12,570 a year. If you earn less, you don't pay any NICs. If you're self-employed, as many of us are these days, if you make annual profits over £6,725, that's when you start paying national insurance. The headline tax cuts that Hunt introduced, national insurance rate, the main rate is falling from 12% to 10%. What does that mean in real money? It means that the average employee will save 450 quid a year. So not huge money, but better than a kick in the teeth. But important proviso, if you're self-employed, these changes won't come in for you until April.
But also the tax thresholds, the level where you start paying tax, that's been frozen.
That's right.
Pulling more people. So when you look at it overall, are you actually better off?
We've been making this point on GB News for months and months and months. Jeremy Hunt's budget back in the autumn was headlined as a tax-cutting budget. Do you remember? It was across all the newspapers. Here on GB News, within minutes of the statement, some of us were saying, actually, this is a tax-raising budget because of what you say, Pip, because those tax thresholds have been frozen, firstly by Rishi Sunak. When he was Chancellor back in 2021, 2022, they were frozen until 2024, and then Jeremy Hunt extended that until 2028. What it means is that that starting rate of tax I just referred to, that £12,000, that is frozen. That means more people are dragged into paying tax. The same for the upper rate of tax, the highest rate of tax. So that fiscal drag completely blows away this tax cut, whatever the Tories say.
Liam, we'll hear more from you at 11 o'clock. Stay with us, and you stay with us as well on Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning. It's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Showers in the far north today, where it will be blustery. Sunny skies for most elsewhere, a perfectly pleasant winter's day. Now, outbreaks of rain overnight, clearing first thing, and then blue skies for many, especially England and Wales. Just some patchy cloud there for Northern England and Northern Ireland. The odd shower for the north of Northern Ireland, but it's really across central and northern Scotland where the bulk of the showers will be, particularly through the morning with the odd rumble of thunder, some hail, some sleet and snow over the hills as well. And it's going to feel cold in a gusty wind. But further south, with sunny skies and lighter winds, 9 or 10 Celsius, feeling perfectly pleasant. Now, into the evening, we keep the clear skies for long enough across southern and southeastern parts, and with light winds, to lead to a touch of frost by dawn. Elsewhere, we've got increasing cloud once again, especially across Wales, Northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and outbreaks of rain and a wind turning up by dawn. So that'll keep things milder in the north, but a chilly start further south. However, that's where the best of the sunshine will be first thing across the Midlands, East Anglia and southern England. Northern Scotland, meanwhile, sees some very strong winds during the morning on Saturday, with 60, 70 mile-per-hour wind gusts and some heavy rain lingering across the far north, especially for Caithness, Sutherland and Lewis. Elsewhere, many places will be dry, fair amount of cloud about, but feeling pleasant enough in any sunny spells.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Still to come, what do you think makes the perfect full English? Maybe bacon, maybe mushrooms, maybe beans. Well, you won't believe this. The English Breakfast Society wants a certain fruit to be added to the dish. Yeah, we'll tell you a bit more about that. You have to stay tuned to find out.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. It is exactly 10 o'clock. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News. It is Friday the 26th of January. You are watching and listening to Ellie Costello and Pip Thompson.
The King has been admitted to hospital for treatment for an enlarged prostate. As Buckingham Palace say they're delighted that his diagnosis is having a positive impact on public health awareness.
He represents the best of Great Britain. Leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, has jumped to the Prime Minister's defence. That's what she said. Our political editor, Chris Hope, has the latest.
A possible challenge to Sunak there, the PM, makes clear she backs him and he's going nowhere.
The government has warned of a more than 1 in 4 chance that Russia will attack another British ally within the next 2 years. And in our GB News poll, only 17% of British people say they would willingly fight for our country.
Nitrogen gas execution. Convicted murderer Kenneth Eugene Smith is the first person in the world to be put to death using nitrogen gas in the state of Alabama overnight.
Cool or cruel? The German model and actress Claudia Schiffer stole the show at the film premiere of Argyll. Well, her cat in a backpack did. It's been very divisive.
Getting so many views and thoughts from you this morning on that execution by nitrogen gas overnight in Alabama. The story about the cat. I know it's something completely different, but we want all your thoughts this morning. Is it cruel to put a cat in a backpack, even if there are air holes and some glass? What do you think? gbviews@gbnews.com. Maybe Claudia Schiffer, the cat's owner, would like to comment this morning.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Let's get your latest headlines now with Sophia.
Thanks, Pip. Good morning. It's 10 o'clock. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. His Majesty has been admitted to a London hospital for treatment for an enlarged prostate. Buckingham Palace says the King is delighted to learn that his diagnosis is having a positive impact on public health awareness. The King is also understood to have visited the Princess of Wales, who's recovering from abdominal surgery. A statement from Buckingham Palace thanked all of those who've sent their good wishes over the past week. The Attorney-General will consider reviewing the sentence of Nottingham triple killer Valdo Calocane after receiving a complaint that it could be too lenient. He was given a hospital order yesterday and will likely spend the rest of his life in a high-security clinic. He was found to be suffering from severe mental illness when he killed 3 people with a knife before attempting to kill 3 others. He'd stopped taking prescribed medication and could hear voices in his head. He'd also visited London's MI5 headquarters to ask them to stop controlling him. 3 psychiatrists agreed that a hospital order would be the best course of action. A prisoner in the US state of Alabama has become the first person to be executed with nitrogen gas. Kenneth Smith was convicted of murder in 1988 and had already survived a lethal injection when officials struggled to insert the needles into his body. Human rights groups and the United Nations had tried to prevent yesterday's execution, claiming the method was risky and cruel. Spiritual advisor Jeff Hood, who witnessed Smith's death, said he could be seen struggling for several minutes.
What we saw was minutes of someone struggling for their life. We saw minutes of someone heaving back and forth. And we also saw correction officials in the room who were visibly surprised at how bad this thing went.
There are no obvious alternatives to replace Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. That's according to a new poll. Ipsos UK found that 42% of those who voted for the Tories in 2019 have a favourable view of Mr Sunak. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson scored slightly more with 43%. However, his unfavourability was higher than the current Prime Minister. It comes amid claims of a plot to oust Rishi Sunak before the next election, after former Cabinet Minister Sir Simon Clarke called on him to resign earlier this week. Millions of workers are feeling the benefits of more pay today after recent cuts to national insurance. Taxpayers now pay a basic rate of 10%, down from the previous 12%, with the government saying it'll save people around £450 a year. But Shadow Secretary for Women and Equalities Annalise Dodds says people are worse off.
What we've seen under the Conservatives has not been tax cuts. We've actually seen tax rises, 25 Conservative tax rises just since the last general election. And the reality of the national insurance so-called tax cut, it was actually just giving people back £2 of every extra £10 that they're going to be paying in tax. So I'm afraid this is a bit of a tax con.
More investment is needed in Northern England amid concerns that cuts to infrastructure are leaving people nearly £8,500 worse off. The Northern Powerhouse Partnership says productivity in the north is roughly 40% lower than London or the South East. The business group says that cuts to public sector spending will outweigh any of the short-term benefits that might have been felt after reductions to national insurance. It's urging the government to re-adopt its former plan for growth in the north, in line with the levelling up agenda. And Canada is accusing Britain of being unwilling to reach a mutual agreement amid a row over a free trade deal. Talks with Ottawa began in 2022 after Brexit saw Britain excluded from existing EU trade agreements. Canada's Trade Minister cited market access barriers after farmers complained that they'd been effectively shut out of Britain's beef market due to a ban on hormones. The UK says it reserves the right to pause negotiations with any country if progress is not being made. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Pip and Ellie.
Welcome back. It's 6 minutes past 10. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Pip Thompson and me, Ellie Costello.
In some breaking news, the King has been admitted to a London hospital for treatment for an enlarged prostate.
Well, he's also understood to have visited the Princess of Wales, who's recovering from her own abdominal surgery at the London clinic.
Our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, is with us in the studio. Cameron, what can you tell us then about what we know?
Yeah, so the King arrived back in London last night. He had been staying in Sandringham ahead of this surgery. This morning, he left Clarence House, accompanied by Queen Camilla, and was seen entering the London clinic this morning. Now, the London clinic is the hospital where the Princess of Wales is still recovering from her abdominal surgery a couple of weeks ago. I am told that the King did visit the Princess of Wales ahead of his own procedure for an enlarged prostate. prostate. So Buckingham Palace in the last half an hour or so released a statement where they said His Majesty would like to thank all those who have sent their good wishes over the past week and is delighted to learn that his diagnosis is having a positive impact on public health awareness. Now, it's incredibly rare, as we've spoken about at length, for members of the royal family to disclose their private medical information. I'm told the King chose to because he wanted to encourage other men his age, or at least those over 50, to check their symptoms and seek medical advice if they're experiencing similar symptoms to presumably what the King has. So, yes, the King this morning admitted to the London clinic.
And it really has had a positive impact, hasn't it? Exactly as though, as he wanted, coming out with this publicly. You were talking about NHS searches for prostate issues, and they've gone through the roof, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So last Tuesday, the website page for an enlarged prostate compared to Wednesday, when the news broke that the King was going in for this treatment, 11 times more views than had happened the previous day, which equates to one every 5 seconds, roughly.
Incredible.
So it is quite incredible. As to how long the King is going to be in hospital for, Buckingham Palace are not going into details on that, but what we have been told is that clearly engagements in the immediate interim have been cancelled or at least postponed. Camilla with His Majesty as well, which means at the moment we don't have any senior members of the royal family actually out and about, because Prince William isn't doing anything until Princess Catherine's out of hospital, and of course the Princess of Wales is in hospital. So it shows this slimmed-down monarchy being incredibly slim at the moment.
And it is interesting, isn't it, that approach taken by the King to divulge that information, because it probably normally wouldn't have come out until afterwards, and it's certainly something that his late mother would not have done. No, and if you remember back to early 2022, the Buckingham Palace were caught short, actually, because the Sun broke the story that the Queen had secretly, as in the late Queen, had secretly spent a night in hospital for tests. And then, of course, all the media and the public were panicking and speculating about what could possibly be wrong with Her Majesty the Queen, whereas the King has been proactive in his view of going into hospital. It's very straightforward, as we understand it, procedure. He's decided to tell us exactly what the problem is in a way to encourage the population to seek medical advice if they need it, and it quashes that speculation that something more serious has happened, because we know exactly what he's going in for.
It's even rare to hear before the operation takes place. I mean, we were commenting in the last hour that we probably wouldn't hear anything until afterwards, and they would tell us that everything was OK. But actually, we've been told that he's been admitted and he's thankful for all the support. That in itself is a marked difference, isn't it?
Yeah, I was contradicted a couple of seconds later by the statement from Buckingham Palace. Yes, but of course, I think it's quite hard to hide when you've got pictures of the King, A, leaving Clarence House from paparazzi, and B, arriving at the London clinic as well, because it's clearly very obvious that the King is going into the hospital. As we were saying, we didn't know whether it was just to visit the Princess of Wales or indeed for his own surgery. It turns out it's both.
OK. Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent, very good to see you this morning. Thank you for bringing us up to date.
Now, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has had a difficult week. That's a bit of an understatement, isn't it? As he's faced pressure to stand down to avoid a Conservative, in quotes, massacre at the next election. That was Simon Clarke who said that.
But could his fortunes be turning? Because the Commons leader, Penny Mordaunt, has launched a staunch defence of the Prime Minister.
She said he doesn't just get Britain, he represents the best of Great Britain.
A GB News People's poll has found that only 20% of Britons actually support the Labour Party. Labour is on 45%, Reform has 12% and 10% for the Liberal Democrats.
Well, let's talk to our political editor, Chris Hope. A very good morning to you, Chris. Let's start then with Penny Mordaunt's comments. I mean, how much influence does she actually have in terms of putting her own view out there? I mean, she was at one time, you know, a possible leader in waiting, wasn't she?
Well, yeah, I think she's the most obvious successor to the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. And it's fascinating that she would say these remarks from the dispatch box in the House of Commons, not in a press release or tweet, but in the actual place where it counts. She said there, he's a wonderful dad, he gives quietly to charity, he runs for his local hospice, he represents the best of Britain. That's really trying to praise and lift up the PM, Mr Sunak, after a very, very difficult week when he's had his authority undermined by Simon Clarke. The irony of that, of course, Pippinelli, is it came as I was being told about another plot from people who thought they could drop in Penny Mordaunt as leader. It'd be a contract with Britain, an election after 100 days, a bit like Newt Gingrich back in 1994, the Republican congressman who did this with a contract with America, and then won and then the Republicans won both houses in the November '94 elections in America. This stuff is all on the side. It's not really realistic. No one thinks they can have a fourth leader in the past 4 years. The problem is that as soon as they appeal for calm at the top of the party and loyalty, Tory MPs look at them and go, well, you weren't very loyal to Boris Johnson. You weren't loyal to Liz Truss. Why should we listen to you? And the absolute point of all this is the Tory party, as that people polling found, is 25 points behind Labour. 25 points behind Labour and just 8 points ahead of Reform. If Nigel Farage, our colleague at GB News, if he declares he's going to lead Reform, you can add probably 6 points to that. And that means that the Tories could go into third place if that were to happen. That's the kind of jeopardy the party's in. And the Tories exist for power. If they can't guarantee the next election, they look for a way to solve that. And that is what is undermining the PM. I mean, I think he's on good form, bouncy form. He believes in his mission. And he is the best of British, according to Penny Mordaunt, his nearest likely challenger. But the problem is the polls aren't budging. And that's what's at the heart of the whole issue.
OK, Christopher Hope there for us in Westminster. Thank you very much indeed. And joining us now in the studio is former advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley, and the former Labour MP, Simon Danczuk. Very good to see you both this morning. Charlie, let's start with you, shall we, and those comments from Penny Mordaunt, describing Rishi Sunak as the very best of British. I mean, she will be aware of the optics of this week and the potential damage that it's done to the Tory party. And she does know as well that divided parties don't win elections.
Well, she's absolutely right. I mean, Rishi Sunak has delivered on a platform that matters to people. He said at the start of 2023, I think it was, he said that the people's priorities would be his priorities. He's identified what comes up at the top of every focus group, which is the cost of living, so dealing with the economy, getting the deficit down, growing the economy, and making sure that tax cuts come into play, which will be happening,
But come
I'm
on,
sure,
Charlie, he's just not cutting through, is he? I mean, there's two by-elections next month, which the Tories are expected to lose. We've got the local elections in May. They're expected to take a drubbing. This working assumption that he has of an election the second half of the year, it might have to be brought forward, the way things are looking.
Well, a week is a long time in politics, and the polls move up and down. But what matters is, you're absolutely right, the polls that matter are the ones on polling day. So we'll see in those by-elections, although governing parties don't normally do well in by-elections. Local elections are often an opportunity for people to perhaps vent a bit of frustration against the status quo. But when it comes to the general election, the choice will be absolutely clear. It'll either be Sir Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak as the Prime Minister at number 10.
25% lead by Labour. How are the Tories going to claw?
I always take these polls with a little pinch of salt. Maybe a big dosing might be helpful this time round, because if you listen to every poll going, go back to 2015, Ed Miliband would have been Prime Minister. In 2016, we would have remained within the EU. In 2017, Theresa May would have won a thumping majority. In 2019, we could have had the prospect of Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister. These polls always move. They are never set in stone until polling day, and so the Prime Minister has a few months now to go, up until quite a few months to go now, to make sure that he delivers the message to the country that he is delivering on the things that he says he's going to do, and the people will be able to instil confidence, I think, back in him.
I think Rishi could have turned it round. I was saying he could have turned it round, but he's rapidly running out of time. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I'm sure Charlie will agree it's a sorry state of affairs when a cabinet minister coming out publicly supporting her Prime Minister is actually a news story. Is that desperate to get support within the cabinet that it becomes a news story when Penny Mordaunt comes out supporting him? It's a desperate situation for the Conservatives. What is also interesting, I think, in this polling that GB News have done is how robust Reform are becoming.
Absolutely. They're neck and neck, if not slightly ahead of the Lib Dems.
Oh, yeah, ahead of the Lib Dems. They've only been around a few years. The Lib Dems have been around, I think, literally hundreds of years. So Reform are doing particularly well, and 14% of people say it's very or somewhat likely that they'll consider voting Reform. So they're polling on 12% at the minute. One opinion poll had them on 13%, I think, earlier in the week. But there are people still considering voting for them. So I think that vote will go up as time goes on. That will certainly damage the Conservatives. And it could take some votes from Labour as well. These will be people who voted Conservative last time in the red wall seats who might be going to Reform, not back to Labour.
And I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it, reform and the threat that they pose now to the Tories. I mean, we were talking about it yesterday, weren't we, Charlie, with the resignation of Will Dry, who was also a former special advisor like yourself to Rishi Sunak, once very, very close allies. But he talked about Nigel Farage, and he says, depending on what Nigel decides to do next, the Tory party could be obsolete by Christmas.
Well, I mean, Will's had a very colourful political career, and this is just a road that he's gone down, another route which he's entitled to do that, and it's not one that I would take. But it goes to the heart of what you were saying. Divided parties don't win elections, and when you've got Reform, who's as much as I think Nigel's brilliant, but they can't work out between themselves whether Richard Tice is leading Reform, whether it's going to be Nigel. The idea that Nigel will just come in and say, well, I'll take over now, that doesn't sound like a united party to me. But what we've got in the Conservatives is a leader who. The cabinet, yes, not necessarily news, front-page news, but getting behind the Prime Minister after a bit of a difficult week. Backbench MPs in their WhatsApp groups.
Are they getting behind the Prime Minister? I mean, how serious do you think this plot could be to oust him? Because there's some speculation that actually this is very serious.
And I think, look, nobody wants to hear about it in the margins, particularly in the run-up to a big election year. But I think the reality is that the Conservative Party, if it does know one thing, it's about sort of winning elections, and it's about getting behind when it needs to. It will understand and recognise that all these divisions, all these noises off, whether it's on policy matters or whether it's on personality, everybody who is everybody will get out and support.
So you don't think the plot's serious?
I don't think it is, and I think that the poll that was conducted is, more news is emerging by the hour about this particular poll, how it was conducted, how it was funded, how the question was put forward, and if you want to dive down into just the polling, and if you sort of obsess about figures week after week without any understanding or acceptance of what could be in the motivations of the public's head and their hearts, when they start to see the pound in their pocket again, when they start to see tax cuts coming, when they start to see a flight from London's Heathrow or wherever it might be into Rwanda, to see those flights off the ground, to see policies that this government has said it's going to do, to see the government delivering, that will shift the dial.
Charlie's doing an admirable job in attempting to defend the Conservative brand, but I think he's struggling, and this opinion poll shows it, because when people are asked who they would like to replace Rishi Sunak as the Conservative leader, most people say Nigel Farage, who's actually in Reform. So you've got them polling on 12%, you've got 14% saying they would consider voting Reform, and then you've got a decent percentage saying that they would pick Nigel Farage to be the next Prime Minister. If Nigel moves closer to Reform and actually, takes a leadership role in there, I think there'll be a lot more support for Reform come election day.
Let's have a quick look at Labour with you, Simon, because how do you think Sir Keir Starmer is feeling looking at the polls at the moment? I mean, 25% lead, but in this GB News poll, I mean, that would suggest a commanding Labour Party majority,
Absolutely.
wouldn't it?
I mean, smug might be the position that they're...
And he doesn't need to do a lot, does he?
No,
he's
not doing a lot, is he? He's announcing very few policies. He's playing it very safe. He's deliberately not announcing policies so that he can't be challenged on them, and so that when they do come into power, they can do more or less whatever they want. He'll be very pleased in terms of the opinion polling. And who could imagine it changing from where it is now? I mean, yeah, some support will drift away, perhaps to Reform, perhaps back to the Conservatives, but surely they will continue to have a decent lead right up to election day. Now, it's hard to see it being any other way.
And election day, we still don't know when it is, but there's still people putting money on the fact that it could be May. I mean, Rishi Sunak could be feeling quite squeezed now.
Yeah.
I'd say November now. What would you say?
Well, I've thought for a long time that it would be the autumn, but if he keeps getting challenged within his party...
Yeah, I think the longer the better, actually, for the Tories, because it means that the Labour Party do have to come forward with policies. They have to get involved in the conversation, where I think the public feel that they still don't know what Sir Keir Starmer stands for. And it just goes back to the final thing, at the end of the day, when it comes to a general election, the choice will be between Sunak versus Starmer, a plan versus platitude, delivery versus decline. That will be the message that the Tories will want to put forward, and we'll have to see what the public thinks.
Absolutely. Thank you both.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon Danshuk and Charlie Rowley. Now, still to come, the government has warned of a more than 1 in 4 chance that Russia will attack another British ally within the next 2 years. Should we be worried? This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Another British ally within the next 2 years.
Well, are the results of our poll surprising? Are we really too woke to fight? Well, let's speak now to the defence editor of The Telegraph, Con Coughlin, who says that a war with Russia is coming and Britain is determined to lose. Very good morning to you, Con. And what do you mean by that? Do you not think we are very prepared for war?
Well, my criticism is more directed at the government, which has presided over 14 years of cuts to the strength of our military, which means that with Putin threatening Europe, he was up in the Baltics only yesterday. When we've got a very visible threat like Vladimir Putin, we need to have our defences properly resourced to defend our interests, and we're not there yet. And I'm very intrigued by your poll, actually, because one of the problems the military has is recruitment. And one of the reasons I contend they're having these problems with recruitment is that the wokery that has now taken root in all three services, positive discrimination, this kind of thing, and diversity targets, that is putting people off applying for the forces, and particularly if you're a white working class male or female, the message is that perhaps you should go somewhere else. So I'm not surprised at all at the results of your poll, because the military is not actively encouraging our young men and women to sign up.
Khan, or is it what some would say is a huge decline in simple British patriotism?
Well, I don't really see that, and I think when you look at things like the coronation, you look at the Queen's funeral last year, or sorry, 2 years ago now. The public display of affection, not just to the Crown, but to the states, the sense of pride in being British, is pretty universal. So, I don't really buy that, but I think there is discontent at the way we are being governed, at the way over many years now, politicians seem to have contempt for the needs of ordinary people as they pursue their own agendas. And so I can see that people feel alienated from some aspects of the system. But in terms of hardcore nationalism, I think the British people still love their country and will fight for it.
And just can you tell us how equipped Britain is compared to how Russia is in terms of soldiers? Britain has some 70-odd thousand soldiers. How does Russia compare?
Well, the Russian military is massive. And I think the last time I looked, the total number of fighting men and women they can call on is in the realms of about 1 million. But having said that, and we've seen this in Ukraine, the quality of the Russian military leaves much to be desired in terms of their fighter aircraft, their tanks, etc. A lot of it is second division, which is why a small country, relatively like Ukraine, has managed to keep the Russians at bay for coming on 2 years. And the kit that we have in the British military, the little we have of it, is very high end, whether it's the Type 45 destroyers in the Royal Navy, the Typhoon fighters in the RAF, and even our dear old tanks have been upgraded. And there are just 40 of them compared to the 2,000 the Russians have. But the 40 we have work very well.
Con, really interested to get your perspective on this. Of course, we are in an election year, and we talk a lot about immigration and the economy, and those being the big issues that people are going to vote on. But more and more, especially with the headlines that we've been seeing this week, defence is surely going to be top of the list of people's priority. With GDP spending currently at 2%, lots of people would like it to be seen more, because they want to see that we can actually defend ourselves. And you've been writing, haven't you, about not only a woeful lack of equipment at the moment, but also a lack of vital training when it comes to defending ourselves against threats from Iran, China and Russia.
Yes, no, we are in a fairly perilous position at the moment. And I think in terms of an election, let us not forget that every politician will tell you that the defence of the realm is the first priority of any government. They say that, but what do? They run down our defence. And I think since the Tories came to power in 2010, there has been a deliberate attempt to run down the armed forces, because the current crop of Conservative politicians have concluded there are no votes in defence, particularly after the controversies around the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. So if we don't have a big military, we can't do anything. But I mean, as I said, the threat environment in the last 2 or 3 years, and particularly since the invasion of Ukraine, has changed immeasurably. And even Whitehall now concedes that there's a 1 in 4 chance of us being engaged militarily, directly, with Russia within the next 2 or 3 years. So if that's not a wake-up call, I don't know what is.
Yeah, it is a frightening thought, if indeed that is true. Con Coughlin, thanks so much for talking to us this morning. Thank you.
Now, do stay with us. Still to come, convicted murderer Kenneth Eugene Smith is the first person in the world to be put to death using nitrogen gas in the state of Alabama. That and much more after your morning news.
Thanks, Ellie. It's 10:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. The King has been admitted to a London hospital for treatment for an enlarged prostate. Buckingham Palace says His Majesty is delighted to learn that his diagnosis is having a positive impact on public health awareness. The King is also understood to have visited the Princess of Wales, who's recovering from abdominal surgery. A statement from Buckingham Palace thanked all of those who sent their good wishes over the past week. The Attorney-General will consider reviewing the sentence of Nottingham triple killer Valdo Calocane after receiving a complaint that it could be too lenient. He was given a hospital order yesterday and will likely spend the rest of his life in a high-security clinic. He was found to be suffering from a severe mental illness when he killed 3 people with a knife before attempting to kill 3 others. The United Nations has condemned the first execution of a person using nitrogen gas. Kenneth Smith was convicted of murder in 1988 and had already survived a lethal injection when officials struggled to insert the needles into his body. Human rights groups had tried to prevent yesterday's execution in the US state of Alabama, claiming the method was risky and cruel. Millions of workers are feeling the benefits of more pay today after recent cuts to national insurance. Taxpayers now pay a basic rate of 10%, down from the previous 12%, with the government saying it'll save people around £450 a year. But Shadow Secretary for Women and Equalities, Annalise Dawes, says people are worse off. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website at gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2729 and €1.1724. The price of gold is £1,589 and 27 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,609 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Do stay with us here on Britain's Newsroom. We're going to be joined by political commentator Matthew Stadlen and Emma Webb from the Common Sense Society. It's going to be lively. They are doing battle next. Don't go anywhere. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. The time is 10:38. You're watching Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Pip Thompson and me, Ellie Costello. Loads of you getting in touch this morning. Thank you so much for your company and for getting in touch. Loads on the US execution in the state of Alabama last night. That's of Kenneth Smith. First time that anybody has been gassed to death with nitrogen. Peter from Manchester said, "We seem to kill animals humanely. Why don't they adopt the same methodology for humans?"
Paul, good morning. You say the death penalty is a good deterrent for criminals that commit murder and rape, providing there is absolute irrefutable proof. The method of execution should be instantaneous and not anything that prolongs the death. I'm not sure in this case, using nitrogen gas, according to eyewitnesses, that it was instantaneous. But thank you for your thoughts.
And Tony from Reading says the death penalty is revenge, not justice. It lowers society to the same level as the murderers that we execute. Well, do let us know what you think about that. Do get those views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.com.
And we'll continue this discussion because Kenneth Eugene Smith was executed overnight using nitrogen gas.
Yes, the state has called it the most painless and humane method of execution known to man. But that's as a witness described the historic moment as horrific and the worst thing that he had ever seen.
So, is it humane or is it simply a lethal experiment? We're joined by human rights lawyer Shoaib Khan. A very good morning to you. What are your thoughts then? Because we're hearing two different things here. Eyewitnesses telling us that it was absolutely horrific, and yet the state of Alabama saying it was painless and humane, even though it's never been used before, but they make that claim.
Good morning. Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely horrific what they're doing. I mean, I think we were probably long past the time when we were firstly looking for new, novel ways to kill people. But secondly, long past the days of gassing people to death. I think it's horrific, the way, whoever came up with this idea and the way that the courts and the governor and the whole administration, the whole government came together to make this person die in this way. And I think, like you were saying just then, and the eyewitness, I mean, obviously that was the reverend, or one of the eyewitnesses, and it was the reverend who was present at the death. And that's what he says. He says, it was absolutely horrific. And what the administration had been claiming in court and arguing in court for years, or months at least, was that it would be humane. He would be unconscious within seconds. He would die within minutes. In fact, he was writhing and struggling in pain for around 4 to 5 minutes. He was then heavy breathing for another 5 minutes. So at least 10 minutes he was conscious. And then it took about 22 minutes to die, which is absolutely horrific. And like people are predicting, it is torture. I mean, it is cruel and unusual punishment. It is torture. I think it's absolutely appalling that this new method has been used. And in fact, this is a method that, in fact, people have said, previously argued, it was too inhumane, too cruel, too painful to actually use to euthanize animals. And here it is, a state in America using it to kill humans. I think it's something deplorable, really.
Attention surrounding this sentence. Where do you think American support stands for the death penalty now? Because I believe that it's legal in about 27 states, although 7 of them don't actually carry it out still. So that's about half of American states still have it technically in their books. But do you think over time this is something that there's less and less support for?
I think definitely, yes. With time, there is less and less support. But the thing is, the way that it's carried out, even now, there have been calls, or, as your question suggests, about the viability, the feasibility, the correctness of death penalty as a whole. But here, what we're basically arguing about is more about the method. Even if you are going to do it, at least be humane until you've actually abolished it. And that's the thing. I mean, like we saw, courts up till the Supreme Court, the American Supreme Court, all favouring it. Supporting the government in doing this, supporting the governor, saying that it's correct. One dissenting Supreme Court judge basically said, well, obviously going against it, saying it shouldn't go ahead, but then describing it as an experimentation on humans, that he was being used as a human guinea pig. And those are the things that we need to stamp down on. Those are the things that need to be resolved, even if the death penalty still has to be in place.
Shoaib, if, as we say, we accept that some states in America still use the death penalty, but why do you think this method is any worse than the electric chair, which also sounds horrific, than lethal injection, than firing squad? Why is this worse?
I don't think the electric chair is a particularly humane method either. The point is, if you are going to have it, at least have it in a scientific way, in a medical way. I mean, another thing to remember is, obviously the whole penal system, the criminal justice system in America, so many aspects of it are quite barbaric, quite inhumane. And this is another thing, that these aren't actually medical professionals or doctors, someone administering these. These are basically what they call, corrections officers, basically prison officers, prison staff. I don't know how much... even in this case, tragically, in 2022, they previously tried to kill him by lethal injection. And we had sort of staff crowding over him, prodding him with needles. They just couldn't find the vein in which to inject him. And, obviously, there's a time limit within which you have to kill them. Otherwise, legally, you can't continue. And therefore, that attempt was aborted. And that's the thing. The whole process about it from the start till the end. Another thing, he was on death row for more than 30 years. This murder that he committed took place in 1988. And since then, 35 years, he's been waiting for his death, basically. Every few years, the government trying to kill him, and then they fail. And it's all of those aspects taken together, which makes people call for, we need to just stop this system now. We've seen it going on for centuries, but that doesn't make it right. It has to stop.
Human rights lawyer Shoaib Khan, thank you very much. Well, let's talk to political commentators Matthew Stadlin and director of the Common Sense Society, Emma Webb, who are here in the studio. Emma, that was an interesting point that Shoaib made there. He'd already been on death row for some 35 years. That is torture in itself.
Well, I actually, so it's interesting that Matthew and we were discussing before we came on air, we do actually agree on the death penalty, and Matthew expected me to be in favour of it.
Okay.
I know. Hell's frozen over 2 weeks in a row now, but my objections to it on ethical grounds, on practical grounds of justice, that doesn't offset the fact that I'm not particularly concerned about this man suffering. He's a murderer. There's a reason why he's on death row. I understand that it's probably a torturous experience to have the government trying to kill you every year. And I do think that it's unethical that they tried to kill him with a lethal injection, that it didn't work, and that this is actually an experiment that they've chosen to do with this nitrogen gas. But I'm not in favour of the death penalty for the reason that, and actually this is on Christian grounds, I believe human beings are fallen, and I don't have faith in the justice system. I don't think any justice system should have the power over life and death. But that isn't to say that I don't think that prisoners who have done horrific crimes shouldn't be held in extremely uncomfortable situations and to be punished for their crimes, because my view is that part of justice is punishment, and I know that that's not a particularly popular view anymore. So I don't have a problem with you know, this prisoner experiencing suffering or anything like that, in terms of how long he's been in prison for and waiting on death row. But I don't think that the state should have, or in the case of America, states should have the power over life and death, because I don't think that human judgment is infallible.
And what about the suffering at the point of death as well? Because we've had emails in this morning talking about Kenneth Smith struggling for life for 22 minutes, as eyewitnesses have been describing. But then we've also had emails in this morning saying, well, his victims weren't given the luxury of a painless death, so why should he?
So first of all, I have no truck with killers, with rapists, with child abusers, and I do very firmly believe in the punitive element of prison, of incarceration, as well as the possibility of rehabilitation. But let's be clear, there is no humane way in which to kill a human being. It's bad enough what we do to animals. To do it to human beings, even if they themselves have done horrific things, is wholly unacceptable. America, in this way, is a far less developed, far less civilised society than we have over here. I remember I used to spend a lot of time in New York working, and I had a conversation with someone who I would instinctively agreed with on a lot of things. She was a Democrat voter, and she was implacably in favour of the death penalty. It was like suddenly being parachuted in from Britain to America into an alien culture in this respect. It is a newer society, the United States as we know it, and it is very uncivilised in this particular area. This man, as we've already heard, committed this appalling crime 36 years ago?
Does it make a difference, though, how long ago it was?
It does, because part of the torture is not just the physical suffering at the point of death, and I return to the fact you can't kill someone humanely, but it is also the anticipation of being killed. And I don't think it is any exaggeration to say that there is blood on the hands of the American judicial system. I do actually very strongly disagree with Emma. I do care about the suffering of this person. I do believe in prison, and no doubt being put behind bars involves a degree of suffering. But if you commit a crime, then there is no alternative to that if you commit this sort of crime. But to torture someone with the anticipation of their own death is absolutely disgusting. Now, why do we not put justice in the hands of the victims? We don't put justice in the hands of the victims because otherwise we would be in a society based around revenge. Yes, the impact on victims' families can have some sort of impact in terms of judgment or in terms of sentence, but not to the extent that victims are allowed to torture, the families of victims are allowed to torture the criminals or put them to death. And in this regard, we are superior, I'm no doubt about it, to America. And that's even without talking about the worries of miscarriages of justice. It's without talking about whether it is actually a deterrent. America, remember, is a truly violent society. So there's a very strong case to be made that the death penalty has no effect anyway.
What about the other aspect to this? Just to explain what happens with this execution, it's clamping a mask tightly to the face, covering the mouth and nose. But there was some suggestion about how safe that is for people in the room because of the risk of the gas escaping. It hadn't been tested before. What if the mask had slipped?
I mean, it is an experiment. They were using him as a guinea pig, and part of the reason, as we said, is because they'd failed to execute him with a lethal injection. So obviously there are sort of other dangers involved, but I don't think that, you know, those are kind of more safeguarding issues rather than the heart of the ethical question. And I think it's quite interesting that there are a lot of people who politically, I think, they would disagree with the death penalty, but politically they wouldn't be inclined to recognise the fallibility of the state. They would have this idea that it is possible for us to construct an ideal state, whereas I don't have that confidence in human government, and that's the reason why I don't think that any state should have the power to do this. So for me, like I was saying, you know, my disagreement with Matthew is that I'm not really that interested in the extent to which this individual suffered after the horrific crimes that he did.
That's not Christian, Emma, is it? Because Christianity is partly based around the idea of redemption, isn't it? About empathy, about caring for even those who have done the most appalling things.
and actually, at the crucifixion, one of the criminals did repent and the other didn't. But I don't think that means that you don't believe in human justice and that you don't believe in punishment, worldly punishment. So I think that the two things.
Rehabilitation? I mean, he was 21 years old when this happened in 1988. In the UK, he could now be a free man.
Well, I think that's wrong. I think that, I mean, now we have whole life orders, and I think that for people who commit horrific crimes, they should have a whole life order. A life sentence should mean a life sentence. I do believe in rehabilitation for some criminals, not for all. I don't think it's possible for all people to be rehabilitated. I think it's possible for anybody to repent of their crimes and of their sins. But I don't think that rehabilitation should be put above punishment when it comes to justice. I think that the punitive aspect of it is a very important part of justice. It's also an important deterrent. So I don't think that that prison is for the sake of rehabilitating the criminals, because it's not about them, it's about justice to the victims.
OK, Emma, just need to break in there because we've got some huge football news, Ellie.
Yeah, breaking news in the past few minutes. Jurgen Klopp has announced he's going to stand down as Liverpool manager at the end of this season and said that he is running out of energy. I've actually got the statement here. He says he loves everything about this club. He loves everything about the city. I love everything about our supporters, the team, the staff. I love everything. But how can I say it? I'm running out of energy. I have no problem now, obviously, but I knew for longer that I'd have to announce it at some point. I know that I cannot do this job again and again and again.
Matthew, there was an exclamation from you there.
Yeah, I'm astonished by that news. Amazing to be in the studio when it dropped. Last season, he had a terrible season, and I predicted to my Liverpool supporting friends, and I'm a Man U fan, that he wouldn't survive the season. He clawed his way into this season, did survive, and now Liverpool are riding high at the top of the league. I was at the game the other day when Liverpool knocked Arsenal out of the FA Cup. The Liverpool fans in the streets of North London chanting, Liverpool, Liverpool, top of the league, rubbing salt in the wounds. They are flying high in lots of competitions. They've just got to a final. It is remarkable, and I said wow, and I'm not a Liverpool fan. You will hear a collective groan across the UK from Liverpool fans, because this man has turned a club that had not won the league for 30 years into a title-winning enterprise.
Well, that breaking news in the past few moments that Jurgen Klopp will stand down as Liverpool manager at the end of the season is significant, because he is widely regarded as one of the best football managers in the world. We'll have more on that after the weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning. It's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Showers in the far north today, where it will be blustery. Sunny skies for most elsewhere. A perfectly pleasant winter's day. Now, outbreaks of rain overnight, clearing first thing, and then blue skies for many, especially England and Wales. Just some patchy cloud there for Northern England and Northern Ireland. The odd shower for the north of Northern Ireland, but it's really across central and northern Scotland where the bulk of the showers will be, particularly through the morning, with the odd rumble of thunder, some hail, some sleet and snow over the hills as well. And it's going to feel cold in a gusty wind. But further south, with sunny skies and lighter winds, 9 or 10 Celsius, feeling perfectly pleasant. Now, into the evening, we keep the clear skies for long enough across southern and southeastern parts, and with light winds, to lead to a touch of frost by dawn. Elsewhere, we've got increasing cloud once again, especially across Wales, Northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and outbreaks of rain and a wind turning up by dawn. So that'll keep things milder in the north, but a chilly start further south. However, that's where the best of the sunshine will be first thing across the Midlands, East Anglia and southern England. Northern Scotland, meanwhile, sees some very strong winds during the morning on Saturday, with 60-70 mile-per-hour wind gusts and some heavy rain lingering across the far north, especially for Caithness, Sutherland and Lewis. Elsewhere, many places will be dry, fair amounts of cloud about, but feeling pleasant enough in any sunny spells.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Well, breaking news in the past few minutes that Jurgen Klopp has announced he will stand down as Liverpool manager at the end of this season. He says he's running out of energy. Very big footballing news this morning.
Liverpool doing so well at the moment. What impact could it have on the remainder of their season? What is your reaction? Do let us know. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. It's exactly 11 a.m. on Friday, the 26th of January. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Pip Thompson and me, Ellie Costello.
Jurgen Klopp is to step down as Liverpool manager after 9 years at the helm. They're currently top of the league, a move that will shock the football world.
King Charles has been admitted to hospital for treatment for an enlarged prostate, as Buckingham Palace say they're delighted his diagnosis is having a positive impact on public health awareness.
Was justice served? The Attorney General is set to review the sentence of Nottingham killer Valdo Calacane after claims from the victims' families that he got away with murder. Our political correspondent Catherine Forster has more.
Yes, Victoria Prentice has now to decide whether to refer this to the Court of Appeal if she considers that the sentence was unduly lenient. Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer has come out supporting an inquiry. I'll bring you the details shortly.
Nowhere safe for Jews. The actress Dame Maureen Lipman speaks out ahead of Holocaust Memorial Day tomorrow. We'll get reaction to her comments.
Cool or cruel? German model and actress Claudia Schiffer stole the show at the premiere of the film Our Gill. Well, her cat in a backpack did.
Well, really shocking news there from Jurgen Klopp. News that is going to shock the footballing world. Do let us know your reaction to that news, that he is going to step down as Liverpool manager. GBViews at gbnews.com. But first, let's get a news update with Sophia Wensley.
Thanks, Ellie. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Some breaking news. Jurgen Klopp has announced he will stand down as Liverpool manager at the end of the season. The 56-year-old informed the club's ownership of his decision, having taken charge at Liverpool in 2015. He won 6 trophies with the Reds, including the Premier League title in 2020 and the Championships League trophy a year before. Speaking after the shock announcement, he said he wants to take a break and live a normal life.
Ending up as the manager of Liverpool FC is a fairy tale and a very difficult thing to plan. I would say impossible to plan and difficult to reach. But it's only possible if you are very busy and 100,000% committed to everything you do when you dedicate your whole life to it. That's what I did. I am still a normal guy. I just don't live a normal life for too long now. And I don't want to wait until I'm too old for having a normal life.
Now, the Attorney General will consider reviewing the sentence of Nottingham triple killer Valdo Calocane after receiving a complaint that it could be too lenient. He was given a hospital order yesterday and will likely spend the rest of his life in a high-security clinic. He was found to be suffering from severe mental illness when he killed 3 people with a knife before attempting to kill 3 others. He'd stopped taking prescribed medication and could hear voices in his head. He'd also visited London's MI5 headquarters to ask them to stop controlling him. 3 psychiatrists agreed that a hospital order would be the best course of action. A prisoner in the US state of Alabama has become the first person to be executed with nitrogen gas. Kenneth Smith was convicted of murder in 1988 and had already survived a lethal injection when officials struggled to insert the needles into his body. Human rights groups and the United Nations had tried to prevent yesterday's execution, claiming the method was risky and cruel. Spiritual advisor Jeff Hood, who witnessed Smith's death, said he could see him struggling.
What we saw was minutes of someone struggling for their life. We saw minutes of someone heaving back and forth. And we also saw correction officials in the room who were visibly surprised at how bad this thing went.
The King has been admitted to a London hospital for treatment for an enlarged prostate. Buckingham Palace says His Majesty is delighted to learn that his diagnosis is having a positive impact on public health awareness. The King is also understood to have visited the Princess of Wales, who's recovering from abdominal surgery. A statement from Buckingham Palace thanked all of those who've sent their good wishes over the past week. And there are no obvious alternatives to replace Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. That's according to a new poll. Ipsos UK found that 42% of those who voted for the Tories in 2019 have a favourable view of Mr Sunak. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson scored slightly more with 43%. However, his unfavourability was higher than the current Prime Minister. Here comes amid claims of a plot to oust Rishi Sunak before the next election, after former Cabinet Minister Sir Simon Clarke called on him to resign earlier this week. Millions of workers are feeling the benefits of more pay today after recent cuts to national insurance. Taxpayers now pay a basic rate of 10%, down from the previous 12%, with the government saying it'll save people around £450 a year. But Shadow Secretary for Women and Equalities, Annalise Dodds, says people are worse off.
What we've seen under the Conservatives has not been tax cuts. We've actually seen tax rises, 25 Conservative tax rises just since the last general election. And the reality of the national insurance so-called tax cut. It was actually just giving people back £2 of every extra £10 that they're going to be paying in tax. So I'm afraid this is a bit of a tax con.
And Canada is accusing Britain of being unwilling to reach a mutual agreement amid a row over a free trade deal. Talks with Ottawa began in 2022 after Brexit saw Britain excluded from existing EU trade agreements. Canada's Trade Minister cited market access barriers after farmers complained that they'd been effectively shut out of Britain's beef market due to a ban on hormones. The UK says it reserves the right to pause negotiations with any country if progress is not being made. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Pip and Ellie.
Welcome back. It's 7 minutes past 11. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Pip Thompson and me, Ellie Costello.
Bring you some more on the breaking news that Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp has announced he will stand down at the end of this season, saying he's running out of energy. Here he is.
I will leave the club at the end of the season. I can understand that it's a shock for a lot of people in this moment when you hear it the first time, and but obviously I can explain it, or at least try to explain it, and I love absolutely everything about this club. I love everything about the city. I love everything about our supporters. I love the team, love the staff, love everything. That I still take this decision probably will, or shows you that I'm convinced it's the one I have to take.
Well, joining us now is GB News sports presenter Paul Coit. And Paul, you can actually see and hear the visceral emotion there, can't you, from Jurgen Klopp, saying how much he loves the team, he loves the city, but he's exhausted. He wants to take a break and lead a normal life. This is quite a shocking announcement, isn't it?
It really is a shocking announcement. It's something I never saw coming this morning. I don't think anybody did, actually. And I think Liverpool fans are going to be shocked more than anybody else. 2015, he took over, came in from Dortmund, and it took a little while, and people wondering, is it going to work? But it proved to be a masterstroke from Liverpool because they fit. And the secret of football management, and the same with football and players, is having a fit between the manager or the player and the club, and it absolutely worked. UEFA Champions League, Premier League, FIFA Club World Cup they won, and the FA Cup and League Cup, UEFA Super Cup, FA Community Shield. So, he's won it all. And you very, very rarely ever hear a manager walk away from a club. It's always the club that gets rid of the manager. There's always a shelf life with managers. He's been there 9 years. They're fighting on all fronts again this year. They've just made it into the final of the Carabao Cup, which happens on February 25th, where they'll play Chelsea. They're looking very good in the league as well, and it's a really bizarre one. Looking at it, and you say, you hear that he says that he decided it in November. I wonder if there's more to the story, or whether it is just the fact that he's decided that it's time to move away. It is too much. I've done everything that I can do, and now it's time for someone else. But it is a real surprise. Really is.
Well, Paul, if we're a little bit more patient, we might hear and understand a little bit more, because it's been reported that Jurgen Klopp will conduct a news conference this afternoon at 3 o'clock. With Liverpool, they're 5 points clear, aren't they, at the top of the table? What impact could this have then on the rest of their season? Because I think there's some assistant managers that are also leaving as well.
Yeah, it could work both ways, actually, Pip. It could galvanise the team. It could be one of those, let's do this for Jurgen. We're absolutely not going to let him down. So it could be that. And he could do really well as far as the club's going for the rest of the season. Or it could be that situation, which we have seen where managers they know that managers don't have long left. Whereas it's, well, you know what, let's look out for the other guy. But I think probably more the former than anything else. As far as the actual team go for the rest of the season, I don't think it's going to do them any harm at all. Long term for Liverpool, Now, that's a different matter altogether. That's going to be a huge worry, because where do they go now? And I'm sure they don't have any plans yet. And there's a lot of managers that will be thinking, well, I'll like the sound of it, and probably clubs with those managers thinking there's no way we want him to leave. So it's up in the air.
And Paul, how do you think Liverpool fans are feeling right now? I just want to read the message that he's given to supporters in that statement.
Yeah.
He says he really wants them to accept this decision. He said that would be nice. After telling you, don't sing my song too early, after telling you not to be too loud in the stadium, all that stuff like this. He says, do not make it about me. There is just no need.
Yeah, they're going to be devastated. There's not one Liverpool fan that would look at him and think, oh, yeah, his time is over. They've done well, and then they drop a little, and then they come again, and there's some new signings, and he's got young players that are coming through. It works for Liverpool, and so the fans are going to be very worried. What happens next? It was only a couple of years ago where I don't know whether Jurgen Klopp was giving clues where he talked about Steven Gerrard, the legendary Liverpool captain. It's almost like, he's going to be the next cab off the rank here. Liverpool legend, he's the next guy. And it seemed that would be the thing for him. He went to Rangers, worked at Rangers, and then went to Aston Villa, and things didn't go well for Steven Gerrard, who's now out in Saudi Arabia. So there's no way that it's going to be Steven Gerrard, because I don't think he's a good enough manager to take over. So obviously, this is going to be the time for Liverpool Football Club to start thinking, right, we need to start making plans now. And the fans certainly going to be worried, because he's as good a manager as there is at the moment.
Yeah,
Paul Coyte.
Sometimes be one of the best managers in the world. Paul Coyte, thank you so much.
Just getting some reaction
as well. Me or him? I thought you meant I may take over.
Well, you would be as well if you were given the job. You would be as well, Paul Coyte. Really good to see you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, a bit of reaction coming in from former Liverpool defender Jamie Carragher. He's said on X, the news was always going to be a body blow to the club whenever it came. I just thought it would be another few years away. What a manager, what a man. Let's go out with a bang, Jurgen.
Yeah, well, joining us now is former Premier League manager Harry Redknapp. Really good to see you this morning, Harry. So Jamie Carragher referring to it there as a body blow. It does feel like a massive shock.
Absolutely. I mean, when I just got the phone call from you, from your studio there, I just couldn't believe it. I thought, it's not April the 1st, is it? I just, it was such a shock. He looked in such great form the other night that, being interviewed after the Fulham game, so full of praise for the young players who have come in, and looked like he was still enjoying the job as much as the day he arrived. So, yeah, it certainly is a blow. Is he going to pack up straight? I've not got the info yet. Is it straight away or the end of the season?
It's the end of the season, Harry. And he says that he's running out of energy. Just give us your insight to what life is like as a football manager and how gruelling it perhaps is.
Yeah, and it's difficult to explain to people. When people think, oh, the money you're earning, this, how they complain. I understand. I get all that. It's difficult for people to understand. But what you actually go through, the ups and downs, the lows, not that he's had many lows, to be fair. I mean, he's had an amazing ride at Liverpool. They've just been incredible since he's been a manager. So, but, he probably, I don't know, he just feels the same player, same message in the dressing room. Maybe he feels it's time to have a rest. Pep did it. Pep, at Barcelona, looked like he was there forever, and then suddenly he decided to quit Barcelona, took a year off or whatever, went to, maybe he feels he needs a break and have a year away from football and come back again and go somewhere and have another challenge.
So, Harry, is it absolutely knackering then, being a Premier League manager?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's a well-paid, fantastic job. Don't get me wrong. As I said, it's hard to explain to people. They know the money that you're earning, but the pressure is non-stop. Yeah, it is. Every day, you want to be successful. You club belongs to the fans. You want to do well for them, and when it ain't going well, it's a nightmare. And the pressure that comes with it. Yeah, he probably just feels a little bit tired now, and maybe losing that energy and that drive. Although you'd never believe it looking at him, because he looks like he's always got that big smile on his face, hasn't he? And he looks like he's loving every minute of it still. So it certainly has come as a big shock. He's done an amazing job at Liverpool. He's been a great, great manager for Liverpool, and hopefully to go out on a high by winning the Carabao Cup, winning everything. else they're in. So it's going to be an interesting end to the season for sure.
They go out on a high, or at least he goes out on a high. But the timing of this is so interesting, isn't it, Harry? I mean, top of the Premier League right now. They're in the final of the Carragher Cup. They're in contention for 4 trophies this season. And Jurgen Klopp, it was meant to have until the end of 2026 on his contract. So, I mean, we don't want to speculate, but do you think that there could be more to this story? We are expecting a press conference from Jurgen Klopp at about 3 p.m. Or do you think this is a case of him simply wanting to go out on a high? Liverpool are looking good, and it's time for him to bow out.
It could be. It's so you don't know what comes out in the end, do you? But you know, Alex decided at Man United that even at the top, winning the league, maybe Jurgen feels, you know, this year he needs a break, he needs a change. Maybe he feels he wants a year off, do some stuff with his family, and then maybe come back a year somewhere and take on another challenge. You know, nothing is permanent, is it? Everything comes, you know, comes to an end at some stage in life, and maybe he just feels he's gone there. He's had a fantastic time there, and he wants to go back. Certainly winning the Premier League title. I think that's the one that will win this year in front of the fans. Because when he won it a couple of years ago, unfortunately, it was during COVID, and the fantastic Liverpool fans didn't get a chance to celebrate with him as they'd like to have done. So I'm sure that's his ambition, to leave on a high and win the title this year for Liverpool.
OK, Harry Redknapp, the former Premier League manager, very good to have you on the programme. Thank you so much for your reaction to that breaking news that Jurgen Klopp is going to stand down as Liverpool manager at the end of this season. Do let us know your reaction to that shock news. gbviews@gbnews.com.
Yeah, it's a fair bet that Liverpool fans will be completely gutted this morning at that news.
And there is going to be that press conference at 3 p.m. This afternoon, so we'll be hearing again from Jurgen Klopp at that time. We might get a bit more detail about his decision.
Yeah. Now, King Charles has been admitted to a London hospital this morning for treatment for an enlarged prostate.
Yes, he's also understood to have visited the Princess of Wales, who's recovering from her own abdominal surgery at the London clinic.
Well, our royal correspondent Cameron Walker joins us. A very good morning to you, Cameron. We broke this news at about 9:30, didn't we? What can you tell us about the King, his treatment, how long he's expected to be in hospital for?
Yeah, well, Pip, as you can probably imagine, the world's media has descended on the London clinic here in the capital. King Charles and Queen Camilla were seen leaving Clarence House earlier this morning and then arriving here to the London clinic, which is the building you see behind me. Buckingham Palace have now confirmed that the King has been admitted into the hospital for treatment for an enlarged prostate. It's understood before he did so, however, he visited another member of the royal family who is also in the London clinic, and that is the Princess of Wales. She had an abdominal surgery earlier last week, and she's expected to remain in hospital until at least the weekends before 3 months convalescing. As for the King, we don't know how long he is going to be in hospital for, or indeed the specific treatments that he is getting. But it's incredibly rare for members of the royal family to tell us exactly what is wrong with him, essentially. So the fact that the King has decided to tell the world, essentially, that he is suffering from an enlarged prostate, I'm told the reason he decided to do so is because he wanted to encourage others who may not perhaps seek treatment if they're experiencing similar treatments, symptoms even, to do so. So the NHS website really has exploded from when we didn't know about this health news to when we did know about this health news. The page for enlarged prostate symptoms, that's gone up by 11 times, which equates to one every 5 seconds. And in a statement released by Buckingham Palace earlier today, his spokesperson said His Majesty would like to thank all those who have sent their good wishes over the past week and is delighted to learn that his diagnosis is having a positive impact on public health awareness. Now, as for His Majesty's engagements, they are cancelled for the foreseeable future, or at least postponed. Queen Camilla, as I said, is also accompanying the King here inside the London clinic. The Princess of Wales is in the London clinic. Prince William isn't expected to do any engagements until the Princess is out of hospital, which means we're now down to 0 senior members of the royal family undertaking engagements at the moment, and 3 of them are in the building behind me.
point. What does this mean for the royal family in the next few weeks and months? As you say, we've got the Princess of Wales, we've got King Charles now, both in hospital, and their other halves, the Prince of Wales and, of course, the Queen, will be at their bedsides, we can imagine. So it really is going to fall on the other members of this much slimmed-down monarchy.
Yeah, it certainly is. Queen Camilla isn't expected to spend too long in the hospital accompanying the King, so I expect perhaps we'll see her do some engagements next week. Prince William certainly won't do any until the Princess is out of hospital, back in Windsor convalescing, and has been for some time. We know that he's trying to split his time equally between being by the Princess's side and indeed looking after their 3 young children, who are all still attending school as normal as we understand it. But you're right, that less senior members of the royal family, such as Princess Anne, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, the Gloucesters, they are not really stepping up from what I can see. They're certainly continuing the engagements which were already planned. They're keeping calm and carrying on. The Duchess of Edinburgh was speaking to school children, schoolgirls earlier this week in East London about the menstrual cycle, a charity that's close to her heart. The Duke of Edinburgh has been representing the country overseas in South Africa and St Helena. So it is certainly keep calm and carrying on. But I think if this happened 10 years ago, let's say, we wouldn't be in the same situation because there'd be a lot more people on the royal roster carrying out engagements.
OK, Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent there for us. Thank you very much indeed.
Stay with us because we want to know what you think about this. Is it cool or is it cruel? The German model and actress Claudia Schiffer stole the show at a film premiere last night, or rather her cat in a backpack did. We'll be discussing this next. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It is 11:26. Welcome back. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Ellie Costello and Pip Thompson.
Now let's go to some showbiz news, shall we? Because the supermodel Claudia Schiffer has been criticised by animal welfare charities for walking down the red carpet with a cat in her rucksack.
What do you think about that? Quite interesting, because I think plenty of people carry their cats in a backpack.
Yeah.
But this was in the full glare of the media. Lots of lights, can be quite disconcerting for animals.
Well, joining us now is Showbiz reporter Ellie Phillips. Really good to see you this morning, Ellie. So animal charities have said they're very concerned about this, haven't they? Tell us a bit more.
Yeah, so just to put it all in context, essentially this was on the red carpet at the Argyle World Premiere that took place on Wednesday. Claudia Schiffer's cat that we saw there is called Chip. If anyone's interested, he's got his own Instagram page. He actually played the role of a cat called Alfie in the film Argyle. And it's quite a major role, actually, because in the film, Alfie belongs to Ellie Conway, played by Dallas Howard, and the film's all about her as a spy novelist who gets drawn into this world of real-life espionage. The problem is, obviously, Claudia brought her cat to the red carpet in this bag. And also, I just must put out the connection here, why Claudia Schiffer's cat, because Claudia Schiffer isn't in the film. She's married to the film's director, Matthew Vaughn, which is why Chip, their cat, played such a mega role in this film. So anyway, Claudia brings her cat to premiere in this kind of Argyle patterned backpack. But it's actually a specifically bespoke made cat carrier. It's got Perspex dome on the front that you can see with loads of air holes into it. It's actually safe for a cat. But the issue is people are saying it's twofold. One is animals shouldn't really be seen as a kind of fashion accessory. And also is it encouraging people to carry animals in that way without realising how bespoke this design is and how safe it is for the animal. Because from a distance, from photographs, I don't think you can really see that there are air holes. It almost looks like it's in some kind of, I don't know, a spaceship suit or something, or going underwater, whatever that might be. So that, I think, is the main concern here, that will people do a copycat thing and actually cause a lot of harm to these animals? So I do see why people are concerned. And also, she could have just taken it on, a little lead on the runway. But I guess then potentially they felt protected the cat a little bit more. So I can kind of see it from both ways.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if they'd have put it in the lead, the cat would have walked along like a dog. But I mean, interestingly, I've carried, I was at Animal Charity Awards, and I brought one of my dogs along, and I had her in my arms. But the difference there was that she could move. I mean, that cat carrier seemed quite an enclosed environment if you're in the glare of all these lights.
Absolutely, and what those pictures don't show is actually when Claudia handed the backpack over to the actual actors in the film, so that the cat could be pictured with the actual ensemble. You couldn't see the cat because it was hidden away in the bag. It clearly, didn't want to have to show its head out of that element of it. But then also you have to think that when you travel with animals, if you travel on aeroplanes, in some cases, if you've got a support dog animal, they have to be in certain carriers. People often crate their animals at night, so it's not unusual for small animals, in particular domesticated animals, to be put in bags and crates and things like that. I just think it's the fact that it was on a runway. It seemed a fashion moment, and there's a lot going on at the moment about should we dress animals up, should we make them fashion accessories, and more to me, it's worrying that people might try and copy the trend without actually taking the correct safety measures that are in place for this specific bespoke bag.
And I mean, at the end of the day, I think owners like Claudia Schiffer, who I'm sure looks after her cat beautifully, I think it's her daughter's cat, they do know their animals, and I suspect she's probably very responsible and wouldn't have brought the cat along if she thought the cat was uncomfortable. And also, I think it's another reason for animal charities to raise the issue about suspect breeds of cats. I mean, I think this cat is a Scottish fold cat, which charities say are susceptible to genetic mutations. So it gives them an excuse to talk about that.
Yeah, actually, I always think one of the reasons I love Showbiz is whenever you see someone famous doing something, whether it's good or bad, it opens up that channel of conversation to discuss a wider issue. So people might condemn what she's doing, but like you said there, it offers animal charities, people at large, to hear, learn and understand more about, in this case, cats. So I actually think in the long run it will do more good than bad. So, I mean, I'm sure, and like you said, I'm sure Claudia Schiffer loves that cat, would never want to bring harm to it. It was a safe bag for the cat to be in. So I think you're right. I think actually the fact that she's done this in the long run will be a positive thing.
Yeah.
OK, Ellie Phillips, Showbiz reporter. Really good to see you this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
We should just add, Claudia Schiffer, she hasn't yet commented. She might do during today, but she's put lots of pictures and videos on her social media, but she hasn't actually commented on what certain charities are saying.
Yeah, but it is dividing people. Arnie says, I don't see how this is cruel. He uses one himself when he's on a motorbike with his cat. She's strapped in. She has plenty of room to move. There's plenty of air circulation. What is the problem? He says the problem is Gen Z woke snowflakes who need to get a life. But Mel says, of course this is cruel. Why take a cat to an award ceremony? And how much was she paid by the manufacturers of that cat backpack to do it? Interesting. Well, we haven't had a response from Claudia Schiffer yet, but if we do, we'll bring it to you on Britain's Newsroom. Do keep your views coming in, though, on that story, or indeed any of the stories we're talking about today. gbviews@gbnews.com.
Still to come, actress Dame Maureen Lipman has said there is nowhere safe for Jews. That's ahead of Holocaust Memorial Day tomorrow. We'll be talking about that and much more after your latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Pip. It's 11:33. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Jurgen Klopp is stepping down as Liverpool manager at the end of the season. The 56-year-old announced his decision with his side top of the league, saying he wants to ensure there's time for an orderly transition. Liverpool was revolutionised under his leadership, winning 6 trophies, including the Premier League title in 2020, their first win in 30 years, and the Champions League a year before. Jurgen Klopp says he wants to take a break and live a normal life. The Attorney-General will reconsider reviewing the sentence of Nottingham triple killer Valdo Calocane after receiving a complaint that it could be too lenient. He was given a hospital order yesterday and will likely spend the rest of his life in a high-security clinic. He was found to be suffering from a severe mental illness when he killed 3 people with a knife before attempting to kill 3 others. The United Nations has condemned the first execution of a person using nitrogen gas. Kenneth Smith was convicted of murder in 1988 and had already survived a lethal injection when officials struggled to insert the needles into his body. Human rights groups have tried to prevent yesterday's execution in the US state of Alabama, claiming the method was risky and cruel. The King has been admitted to a London hospital for treatment for an enlarged prostate. Buckingham Palace says His Majesty is delighted to learn that his diagnosis is having a positive impact on public health awareness. The King is also understood to have visited the Princess of Wales, who's recovering from abdominal surgery. A statement from Buckingham Palace thanked all of those who've given their good wishes over the past week. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website at gbnews.com.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2736 and €1.1722. The price of gold is £1,589 and 8 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,620 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Well, the time is 11:35, and at noon today, Good Afternoon Britain is with Tom and Emily, and they're here with us now. What's coming up on the show?
We've got a huge amount coming up.
We do. Some big news breaking in our airtime. That's the decision of the International Criminal Court on whether or not this body will say to Israel, stop bombing Gaza. So that's a big thing coming up. But also, all of these
That's
debates...
all part of the case alleging that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. So this may be a symbolic decision, but it's important nonetheless.
And also big debates over what happened in Nottingham. Of course, how that case was carried out, the charges, the conviction of manslaughter rather than murder. Sir Keir Starmer now calling for an inquiry into this, and the Attorney General saying that this should be reviewed. We will have a great deal of detail on why this was arrived at and how it might, if it could, be changed.
And this man in America, this capital punishment case, nitrogen gas, will be having a debate about capital punishment, whether to bring back the death penalty. We'll get both sides on that. It seems particularly barbaric the way this man was put to death, but we'll be having the debate nonetheless. What else have we got?
We certainly will be. And, of course, Jurgen Klopp. That big news. I know you've been discussing it. We'll be diving into it as well. Real big shock, I think, for people who support Liverpool, but also for football fans across the field.
And one more thing. We will be hearing from Richard Holden, the chairman of the Conservative Party, after that polling that we released last night. The Conservatives only on 20%. What can they possibly do to turn things around?
Reform and Lib Dems neck and neck almost.
Crazy, isn't it?
Sort of, are we entering a new world of a third and fourth party or two joint third parties? What might the Tory party chairman, who of course is planning the election strategy for the Conservative Party, will be asking him precisely what he can do to turn that around, if anything, what his strategy will be going into the 2024 election.
Our pollster, Matt Goodwin, said last night that reform could overtake the Conservatives. Whether that's true, I don't know, but
Votes,
always a possibility.
But perhaps not in seats.
That's not in seats. So there you go.
First past post for you, isn't it? Tom and Emily, lots to pack into that programme. We'll be watching from midday. Thank you so much. But for now, you are with Britain's Newsroom on GB News. We've got lots coming up for you in the next 20 minutes, so don't go anywhere.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel. Come and join me this Thursday in Scunthorpe live by scanning the QR code or going on gbnews.com to get your ticket for the event. We'll be discussing things like why the Green Agenda is risking jobs in places like Scunthorpe.
Welcome back. The time is 11:42. Now, tomorrow marks Holocaust Memorial Day, where everyone is encouraged to remember the millions of people that were murdered in the Holocaust under Nazi persecution.
Ahead of this, the actress Dame Maureen Lipman has warned that there is nowhere safe to be Jewish.
Well, joining us now to discuss this is the chairman of the National Jewish Assembly, Gary Mond. Very good to see you this morning, Gary. And what is your reaction?
Thank you for having me.
What is your reaction to the actress Dame Maureen Lipman's comments there, warning that there's nowhere to be safe to be Jewish?
Tragically, I fear she's right. We're seeing tremendous levels of Jew hatred in the UK at the moment, in schools, in hospitals, in workplaces, and it's absolutely soared since the murderous events of the 7th of October, where so many people in Israel were murdered, raped, beheaded, and so on. I'm afraid she is right, and I listened carefully to what she said, and she made a clear point about saying that it's horrendous to use the expression Jews and Palestinians. She's right. We should say Jews and Muslims, because they're both religions, or Israelis and Palestinians, because they're both nationalities. But to say Jews and Palestinians has got an inherent anti-Semitic tone to it.
One of the things that she also said, Gary, and talked about was that how synagogues, burial grounds, they have to have security patrols now. And I think Dame Maureen Lipman, when she goes to visit late relatives, she has to have a key to get in.
That is becoming increasingly the case. Particularly synagogues, where children go for Sunday schools, and indeed Jewish schools as well. And some Jewish schools are actually located in synagogues. The levels of security required are so much higher than they used to be before the war, and absolutely incomparable to what they might have been 5 years ago. And we're hearing these reports from the CST, the Community Security Trust, that looks after security for the Jewish community, and indeed from the police.
And Gary, how do you feel as a Jewish man living in the UK after the events of the 7th of October?
I feel a lot more nervous than I did before the events of the 7th of October. I know that many other Jewish people would take it further and say they're actually frightened, and in one or two cases they can feel terrorised. And one of the contributing factors to that is these horrendous so-called pro-Palestinian marches that are taking place almost every Saturday. Although they're not really pro-Palestinian, they're fundamentally anti-Jew. If they were pro-Palestinian, they would have been marching when Palestinians were massacred by the Syrians a few years ago. No, they're only marching because they are against the Jewish community.
And we are expecting today this ruling by the ICJ, the UN's top court, which will rule on these allegations of Israel committing what South Africa says is genocide. How do you feel about that? And how, depending on that ruling, how much more difficult do you think it might make life for Jewish people in the UK?
It is a complete joke to call what is happening in Israel genocide. Genocide is what the Nazis did to the Jews in the Second World War, where they mass murdered 6 million people in a planned operation over many countries. What is happening in Israel is a war. There is simply a war which was started by Hamas when it invaded Israel and killed 1,200 people. What is happening is that Israel is defending itself. To call it genocide when the civilians who are being killed tragically because of a military operation to root out and eliminate Hamas, which is a genocidal terrorist organization, is nothing short of an insult to the memories of those who lost their lives in the Holocaust.
Gary Mond, the chairman of the National Jewish Assembly, thank you very much indeed.
We'll be joined in the studio by political commentators Matthew Stadlen and Emma Webb. Hello again to you both. Matthew, what did you make of Gary's comments there about how he feels with Holocaust Memorial Day happening tomorrow?
So, just two things where I disagree with Gary, but I have a lot of empathy for him, and I speak as a Jewish person myself. Technically I'm half Jewish. My grandparents were refugees from Hitler. They were kicked out of their homes, kicked out of their country. And I wouldn't be here, by the way, if Britain hadn't taken them in. So my family is very grateful to this country. I disagree with Gary in his characterisation of these marches. There's certainly some hatred on those marches and there's certainly some anti-Semitism. But there are a lot of people who are well-meaning, I think, and who care very deeply about what's happening in Gaza at the moment. That leads me to the second area of disagreement. What we witnessed, and I've said this from the start, on October the 7th and beyond, were acts of medieval savagery by Hamas and by their acolytes. However, and I predicted this, I think the Israeli response in Gaza has been over the top and, in my view, unjustifiable. I haven't used the word genocide, but far too many innocent lives, including many, many thousands of children, it seems, have been taken. On the issue of what it's like to be Jewish in this country, there is no doubt, in my experience of being a Jewish person in London and in England, that when there are flare-ups, and this has been far more than a flare-up in the Middle East, then we see spikes in anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is never justified. It is an evil, it is a sickness, it is a disease that must be rooted out wherever it is found. And although personally I don't feel unsafe in my own country, I think a lot of Jews do, and we have to listen to those voices. I would just add a codicil, and it's important to this, and this is not whataboutery, but there is no doubt that being a British Muslim is not easy either. I think our press is very defensive of Jews, quite rightly so, in this country. And the Jewish population of Britain is in the 200,000s. It's tiny. There is a lot of Islamophobia, either explicit or implicit, in our British media, and that makes life, I think, being a British Muslim pretty tough.
Okay. Emma, how do you feel about these comments that Dame Maureen Lipman made?
Well, I think she's right. I think that the way that things have gone in various Western countries and also the reaction in the Arab world just goes to show how necessary Israel's existence is as the one place where, you know, it's the only Jewish state in the world. It's necessary for the safety of the Jewish people. But of course, Jews are not safe in Israel at the moment either. So in the very strictest sense, she is absolutely correct. And
tomorrow, Holocaust Memorial Day, you've got more rallies taking place, which some people say is a pro-Palestinian rally. Other people
I think it's so deeply wrong and disrespectful. I think it's so deeply wrong and disrespectful. And actually, this Holocaust Memorial Day is so important because we've seen the way that the history of the Holocaust has been misused during these protests. We've seen the way that it's been weaponized to hurt Jewish people with accusations of Israel doing another Holocaust against the Palestinians. It's so important that people are educated about anti-Semitism in Europe, and also, importantly, in the Arab world as well, because you have to remember the way that the Arab states treated Jewish people and kicked so many of them out, and who ended up living in Israel. So I think people are extremely historically ignorant. That's been shown by the interviews that have taken place at these protests. Konstantin Kisin from the Trigonometry podcast has been asking people questions like from which river to which sea, and it's been very apparent that people don't even know the basic geography of the area they're talking about. People are extremely ignorant of the politics and the history, and I think Holocaust Memorial Day is really important this year because people need to know their history.
Is that fair, Matthew, that people have... Too many people are ignorant about this?
Undoubtedly, that is fair. Where I'd push back on this with Emma is that it is not incompatible to care deeply about the Holocaust and also to care about what's happening in Gaza right now. We cannot forget that the Israeli government is an extreme right government and that Netanyahu, in my view, is a very...
And that's not the people.
No, it's not the people, and he's a very bad man. A lot of Israelis have a big problem with him, although I would suggest that the majority of Israelis back what is going on in Gaza, and that's of deep concern to me. Can I just make a point on education? This is really important. I would listen to The Rest is History, a podcast the other day, and even though my grandparents were victims of what happened in the 1930s, I learned a lot about the rise of anti-Semitism in Germany and in Austria towards the end of the 1930s. It is essential listening, because if you want to really understand how we got to a place where 6 million Jews were murdered in an industrial way, listen to that podcast. Educate yourself.
May I add very briefly to that I think another reason why it's so important for people to understand the history of the Holocaust and to make an effort on their own part to go and listen to The Rest is History podcast is a fantastic podcast across the board on every issue. But I think it's so important that people recognise that what we've seen in the last couple of months since October 7th is that the attitude that we think that what the Nazis did is so alien to us. We think it's something that is so foreign and such a horrendous evil that occurred that it's not something that could possibly be in our own psychology as a country, as individuals. But the reality is we've seen so many people standing by, silently, almost encouraging or supporting people who are being unbelievably anti-Semitic, and I think that people need to recognise that this ancient hatred is something that is very much still with us.
But actually, this doesn't. Lessons from the Holocaust do not just apply to how we treat Jews, like me, for example. It applies to how we treat minorities across the board, and the rhetoric of hatred against refugees, asylum seekers, often Muslims, in this country leaves a hell of a lot to be desired. We need to learn the lessons comprehensively, and I say that as a Jewish person, part of a tiny minority in this country.
Do you think it's fair that this rally's taking place tomorrow on Holocaust Memorial?
I wouldn't, personally, I would not touch these rallies with a barge pole, because even though I hope that the majority of people go on them with good intent, there is a hard core of anti-Semitism there. So I wouldn't touch them, but I wouldn't ban them. And I believe in free speech. I believe in the right to protest. And critically, as I've just said, it is compatible to care about the Holocaust, but also to care about what's happening in Gaza. And I'm not comparing the two.
OK, Matthew Stadler,
Thank you.
Emma Webb, thank you very much indeed for your company this morning. And that's it from Britain's Newsroom. Up next is Good Afternoon Britain with Tom and Emily.
Bye-bye.
It certainly is, and we'll be diving deeply into that Nottingham story with calls for an inquiry and the Attorney General asking the judges to review the case. What could possibly change?
And we're going to be hearing exclusively from the party chairman of the Conservative Party after that shock polling put them at only 20 points. Can they turn things around? We'll be hearing what he has to say.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Blustery showers today in the far north, but fine elsewhere. Plenty of sunshine, in fact, and it will feel pleasant in that sunshine as high pressure builds in the wake of this front that moved through overnight. And with that high pressure building, winds will be lighter in the south, but it's still blustery further north with Fairly significant winds for the north and northwest of Scotland in particular. That's where the bulk of the showers will be moving in. Some snow over the hills and mountains of Scotland, although the snow level is rising through the day as milder air arrives. And we will feel that milder air in the south with the lighter winds and the blue skies. Highs here of 10, perhaps 11 Celsius. Then into the evening, actually temperatures fall away in the south because of the clear skies and the light winds. Perhaps the odd mist and fog patch forming, but nowhere near as foggy as it's been over the last 24 hours or so. And we're going to see, as we begin the weekend, plenty of fine weather across much of the UK. -3 Celsius possible in sheltered parts of southern England, but further north it'll be milder because we've got plenty of cloud for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. Further showers or longer spells of rain for the northwest of Scotland and increasingly windy through Saturday morning. 60, 70 mile/hour wind gusts for the Northern Isles and the Western Isles. Elsewhere, many places will be dry. A lot of cloud building into the afternoon, but staying mild in the south, 9 or 10 Celsius.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News.